So what I want to go over today is the different ways that you can have objects be sized in Adobe Muse. There's 3 different ways that you can actually size an object in Adobe Muse. Okay? When you click on a frame that you've created or a box or any graphic, so I can even do it the menu bar, which is in my master, so I can't click on it right now. But any of my graphics here, I can click on them, and then right up here you see resize. And the default for an object that doesn't fill the page or go side to side is a fixed height and width. So I can click here, and actually, oh, it's set to responsive right now. That's interesting. If I were to take a rectangle and draw another rectangle here and just fill it with a solid color here, whoop-de-doo. Now I can go over here. I can have responsive width, no resize whatsoever, responsive width and height, or stretch to browser width. So let's just take a look. I'm going to take these and let's fill this with a photograph so that, well, let's not fill it with a photograph yet. We'll just keep it the way it is. We'll delete these really quickly, and we'll just take this box, and I want to show you what it does, and then we'll fill it with a photograph in a second here so you can kind of see what happens. So I'm going to stretch this box out like so, okay? And we've got the box here, and right now it is set to responsive width. So if I go and I build my page, preview page in browser, by the way, I don't know why you would ever want a blue square in the middle of your web page, but there it is. You'll see that it has a maximum size at over this width here, but then once I go to a certain size, it starts to stretch the box and make it smaller, which is kind of cool. You can do that in code. You can set a maximum size and a minimum size for any object, and it kind of does that for you. Now, if I take it and I set it to no resize, then preview in browser. Now when I resize this, it doesn't change at all. It stays the same width. Then I can also choose to be responsive to width and height. So before I go and show that, let's go back to the original here. If I can grab it. There we go. So if it's responsive in width, see right now it's responsive width only. So as I resize width, if I go up and down, it doesn't change the height of the box. Most elements in a web page are responsive width only. Most. But I can also change it to be responsive width and height. So if I choose that, save, preview in my browser. I really need to do the keystrokes, Command-Shift-E, but that's okay. I'm lazy. Now when I change the width, it'll get to us. Oh, it's not doing it. Oh, there we go. So now, I guess it had to be below the minimum. So now, as I do this, it's also changing the width and the height, and it's doing so, if you notice, in a respective ratio. So in other words, it tries to keep the same width to height ratio. So if that ratio is 5 to 1, so it's 5 units wide to 1 unit tall, as I resize the browser, it's going to try and keep that ratio. So let's say it's 500 pixels by 100 pixel. And then when I cut that in half, it may be 250 pixels by 50. Okay, so it's going to try and keep that ratio the same. And lastly, you can click on an element and you can have it stretch to browser width, which is what my menu bar is doing. Now this is the default. Whenever you draw a box and it goes from edge to edge, it will set this as the default. So if I just delete this and I draw another box here, okay, if I start here and drag it all the way across like that, and actually have it go from edge to edge, just fill it really quickly. Okay, oh, that's hideous. Well, anyway, you'll notice that under the resize, okay, under the resize, it is now set to stretch to browser width. So what ends up happening is, if I go and build this again, that no matter how wide my browser is, it stretches that rectangle to the same width as everything else. Now, you'll notice it does not change the height at all. So you cannot, with Muse at least, have an element that stretches the width and also has a responsive height. It's just not going to happen, okay? Lastly, what's really important to understand how this works is if you have a photograph in a fill instead of just an actual color. So instead of adding a color, I'm going to add an image here, and I'm going to use a square image on purpose because that square image is not going to be very good for this. So whenever you add an image to your rectangle here, you can always choose where it's going to kind of size from. So if I hit save and we go and we build our page now, right now it's to the left, and you can see that's not good. It's not doing anything. It's kind of sitting there. And that's because the fill here is set to stay at original size, and the positioning is top left. Okay, does that make sense? So now I can say scale to fill or scale to fit. Now if I hit scale to fit, it's only going to fit the rectangle based on the longest size. So I can hit scale to fill. That's usually what you'll want. But notice I'm keeping the position in the top left-hand corner. You probably don't want to do that. Somebody turn that off, please. The beeping? No? Okay. All right, so right now it's scale to fit, and we're going to go to preview page in browser, and then as I resize it, notice that it resizes from the left. Okay? However, if I take that same thing and I hit fill and I put it to the center, I can do center top, center bottom, whatever. So center top now, we can see that t-shirt. Let's make this a little bigger so we can see what it's doing a little bit more. Okay, so I'm just going to widen that out a little bit, okay? Was it Control-Shift-E? Boom, there we go. So use the keystroke now. And now as I redo it, you can see that it's keeping the t-shirt in the center of the rectangle. So that's going to usually be much nicer. But again, this long and skinny rectangle is not really helpful for seeing the product. If, however, I change my fill to center-centered, now when I do this, you can see, oops, I got to click off, there we go. You can see it tries to keep it centered in the middle of the picture, but now we still can't see the top and the bottom. So let's take this rectangle and let's put it in the center here like this, okay? And let's change it to responsive width. So if we've got a responsive width, now let's make it a little bigger here so that the response happens a little quicker. So let's just have it there, save, build the page. Now as I change, you can see how that resizes up and down based upon the center of the image. And just to show you, to illustrate the point a little bit more, if I change the positioning of the image here to top now, you can see, forgot to click out, there we go. You can see how it works, and now the photograph is always at the top. Okay, I mean, this is pretty obvious how this all works. Typically, if you've got a graphic with something in a picture in it like that, you do not want a responsive size. So what you would want to do is resize none. And now I can resize it so we can see the whole shirt. I can position it where I want to, okay? And no matter how I size the page, that image stays the exact same size. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay? Yeah. So that's a real basic demo on the way that you can do different sizing options. There's really only 3, okay? Well, I guess there's 4. No sizing, then responsive width, and height, and then stretching the full width to the browser, okay, or to the browser width and always having that. The important thing is to understand when you put a graphic in there, how it's going to affect your graphic and what's going to happen. This means that if you have a rectangle that's going to go full width on your page. The image that you choose is very, very important. This also means, just to throw a little monkey in the wrench here, that choosing images for desktop browsing versus mobile browsing when the browser is vertical instead of horizontal becomes a really big issue. Because, well, I mean, it's not that big of an issue, but in order to really understand it, I mean, when you're browsing on a mobile, this is about what it looks like, okay? As opposed to when you're on a computer and you've got the browser set up like horizontal. And it's actually one of the major issues for mobile browsing. And we're going to talk about designing for mobile in a little bit in the future once you kind of get a good layout set up. But I wanted you to understand how you can, you know, resize different objects and kind of make them responsive. And responsive width stuff is really cool, but it definitely has limitations. And if you're trying to show off a product like this t-shirt on this awful, horrible website that I have designed for you, if you're trying to show a product here, usually you do not want a responsive rectangle. Usually, okay? Responsive stuff is usually used for graphics, you know, so that stretch photograph of the t-shirt model like we were doing in the demo the other day, or something like that. That's where you can use responsive graphics. Just make sure you're careful on where the t-shirt or where the graphic is positioned. Center, center top, top left, middle center, all that other stuff. You want to be mindful of that. Does that make sense to everybody?